They told you that you were free, that your life was yours, that if you worked hard, followed the rules, and stayed on the right path, everything would make sense. But what if that's the biggest lie you've ever believed? What if your routine, your desires, even your thoughts, were never really yours to begin with? You wake up to an alarm you didn't choose, check apps that track your attention, go to jobs that drain your soul, and smile just enough to be seen as normal. You think you're in control, but what if you've simply been programmed to perform? This video is not about productivity hacks. It's not about escaping the matrix with a plane ticket or deleting your Instagram. It's about something much deeper and more dangerous. It's about waking up to a system that trained you to obey, to conform, to punish yourself quietly while calling it discipline. A system that taught you to call exhaustion ambition and obedience maturity. I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to challenge what you've accepted as truth. Because once you understand how control really works, how it shapes your body, your mind, your value, you'll never see normal life the same way again. This is not for everyone. Most people will click away. They'll feel something stir and shut it down. But if something inside you knows, if you felt that quiet pain of living a life that doesn't fit, then stay. Because what comes next might not be easy, but it could be the beginning of your freedom. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing that most of your life has been lived on autopilot. You wake up when the alarm tells you to, not when your body feels rested. You go to work, not necessarily because you love what you do, but because bills need paying and society calls it being responsible. You check your phone before even brushing your teeth, already reacting to a world that hasn't even looked you in the eye. But have you ever really paused to ask, who programmed this sequence? Who decided that this is what adulthood looks like? It's easy to say we're in control, but much harder to admit that what we call choice may just be a highly polished illusion, a performance rehearsed since childhood, shaped by invisible hands. This is what Foucault tried to show us, and most people are still too busy surviving to notice. From the very first day of school, the training begins. Sit still. Don't speak unless spoken to. Raise your hand. Ask permission to use your own body. These rules aren't just rules. They're the first bricks in the architecture of internalized obedience. And this structure, it never leaves. It morphs. The classroom becomes the office. The teacher becomes the manager. The test becomes the KPI report. The same logic persists. Do what's expected, or face the quiet consequences. And the most sophisticated trick of all? You start believing it was your choice. That the suit you wear, the smile you fake, the silence you hold, that it's all part of being mature, but you are not free. You're just performing in a theater designed by others. A play where the script was written long before you had the chance to think for yourself. Let's not pretend this is just philosophy. This shows up when someone feels guilty for sleeping in on a weekend, when a mother apologizes for not being productive enough during her maternity leave, when a teenager already feels like a failure because they don't know what job they want yet. That social conditioning, an invisible leash that pulls every time you try to breathe outside the system, rhythm. The tragedy is not that people are controlled. The tragedy is that they call it freedom. They've been taught that freedom is having more options, not realizing all the options were pre-selected. Want to travel? Here's a pre-packaged Instagram itinerary. Want to succeed? Here's the corporate ladder. Just don't ask who built it. And when it all feels empty, you're told the problem is your attitude, not the framework. Imagine this. A man spends his life chasing a dream house in the suburbs. He gets it. White fence, 2 cars, a job with benefits. But inside, he's restless. He scrolls endlessly, comparing his success to others, wondering why he still feels incomplete. That's invisible control. He was told what to want, and now he has it. But joy didn't come with the deed. Meanwhile, the guy who fixes his plumbing might live in a small flat, own nothing fancy, and yet laugh more often, sleep better, and write poetry at night. Who's really free? The one with the polished life, or the one who never entered the race? Freedom isn't found in the applause. It's found in the refusal to need it. And yet, that refusal comes with a cost, being misunderstood, labeled, even feared. In the age of metrics, you're no longer a person. You're a productivity graph. Your worth is tracked by hours, outputs, impressions, and engagement. This is the modern surveillance society, not cameras on the wall, but pressure in your mind. You self-monitor like there's always someone watching. You hesitate before posting. You filter your emotions. You calculate your moves at work, at home, even in love. The scariest part? There's no one behind the curtain. You've inherited the gaze, and now it lives inside you. Foucault called this the panopticon, a prison where the guard doesn't have to be there, because the prisoners behave anyway. And make no mistake, when you can't cry without shame or rest without guilt, you are living in a cage built from within. People often ask for actionable steps, so here's one. Audit your desires. Sit down with a blank page and ask, what do I want? Now for each item, ask, who benefits from this? If the answer is a brand, a boss, or a social expectation, you might be chasing something that was implanted, not born. Real freedom begins not by running away from life, but by digging into what's actually yours. Want a book to shake your foundation? Try Discipline and Punish by Michel Foucault. It's not a self-help manual, it's a mirror, a brutal, necessary one. And if that's too dense, start with journaling. Every day, list one thing you did because you wanted to, and one thing you did because you had to. See what that pattern tells you over time. There is this myth that rebellion looks like screaming in the streets or quitting your job in flames. But some of the most powerful acts of rebellion are quiet. Saying no when everyone says yes, turning off your phone at dinner, choosing rest over hustle, loving yourself without validation. These aren't dramatic scenes, they're subtle revolutions, but they threaten the system more than any riot ever could. Because when people stop performing, the stage collapses. And yet, with each act of rebellion comes discomfort. A sense that maybe you're falling behind, or worse, that you're alone in your thinking. But you're not. Others are waking up too. They're just quiet about it. They're watching, listening, waiting for someone to say it's okay to disobey. But here's the twist. Seeing the illusion doesn't make you free. It just ruins your ability to pretend. Once you realize the show is rigged, you can't laugh at the same jokes or clap at the same scenes. And this is where the real challenge begins. Because now you have to navigate the world with your eyes open. And trust me, that's not easy. You'll feel the weight of expectations pressing harder. You'll hear the whispers of guilt grow louder. And you'll be tempted to go back, to fit in again. But before you do, let me show you how this illusion was maintained in the first place. Because behind every smile you were taught to wear, behind every habit you call discipline, lies a deeper design, a structure of control that begins not with violence, but with quiet, elegant obedience. They never needed to chain your hands to control you. All they had to do was train your habits. From the moment you entered a classroom, the transformation began. It wasn't about knowledge, it was about rhythm, obedience, order. The bell didn't just tell you when to learn, it trained your body to respond to external commands. Sit, stand, speak now, be silent. And without ever saying it, they made something very clear. Freedom is dangerous, spontaneity is chaos, control is good. Welcome to the disciplinary society. This is where Foucault stepped in, holding up a mirror to modern institutions and showing us what most refuse to see. That education, employment, even healthcare, they're not just systems of support. They are machines for shaping docile bodies. Not rebels, not thinkers, just well-behaved producers. Look around and you'll notice it. In offices, employees fear being late more than they fear being unfulfilled. In hospitals, patients wait hours to be seen, but are still expected to be polite and grateful. At home, kids are told to behave, not to explore, not to express. Everywhere you turn, there's a structure reinforcing one rule: don't deviate. The power doesn't yell anymore. It whispers, and the whisper says, be good, be quiet, stay in line. What used to be the brutal force of kings and empires is now invisible control, a polished systemic mechanism of shaping minds and behaviors without ever raising a hand. That's what makes it so efficient. You're not forced to obey. You're made to believe obedience is virtuous, and over time, questioning becomes uncomfortable. So you stop. The office badge that tracks your entrance, the calendar that dictates your availability, the email signature that demands your allegiance. These are the new tools of modern control. They're not shackles, but they work just as well. Social conditioning makes you think that the more scheduled, calculated, and evaluated your life is, the more successful you are. But here's the thing. If you never question who benefits from this structure, you're not in charge. You're just the best-behaved prisoner in the cell. When a student asks for permission to go to the bathroom, that's not discipline, it's domestication. When a worker won't take a sick day out of fear of appearing lazy, that's not loyalty, it's internalized oppression. And when you constantly monitor yourself to avoid stepping out of line, you're not living, you're surviving. And yet, we celebrate this system. We hand out awards for punctuality. We idolize the grind. We romanticize 80-hour work weeks and call them passion. But how passionate can someone be when their body aches, their mind is numb, and their joy is postponed indefinitely? Let's be real. Most people don't dream of freedom anymore. They dream of efficient ways to cope with captivity. A faster commute. A flexible job. A little dopamine hit from a productivity app. That's the scary part. Discipline no longer feels imposed. It feels like progress. But Foucault warned us, when control becomes invisible, it becomes absolute. When rules no longer need to be enforced, because you've internalized them, you stop seeing them as rules. You see them as reality. Let me show you something subtle. A factory line isn't the only place with mechanical repetition. Have you ever noticed how meetings feel the same across companies? How school tests follow the same structure, regardless of the subject? How even therapy sessions are standardized into checklists and evidence-based protocols? That's disciplinary logic at work. It flattens uniqueness. It optimizes identity. It mass-produces behavior. And it does so without a villain. There's no evil mastermind behind the curtain, just a system doing exactly what it was designed to do: maintain order. The price? Your spontaneity, your wildness, your capacity to imagine something different. Discipline is not about helping you flourish. It's about making sure you fit. And if you don't, the system has quiet ways of pushing you aside. Some of the most intelligent, sensitive people I know were labeled as problems early on. They were too loud, too curious, too slow, too emotional. And the institutions didn't nurture that fire. They tried to extinguish it. Medication, detention, dismissal. And when that didn't work, isolation. Because it is easier to remove what doesn't fit than to ask whether the mold itself is broken. That's why you are not free. Because you've learned to call your own suppression maturity. You've been trained to apologize for your humanity, to shrink your emotions, to justify exhaustion, to explain away your resistance. But resistance is not failure. It's proof that your spirit is still alive beneath the programming, and that matters more than any badge of discipline ever will. Want to test your conditioning? Try doing nothing. Sit in a room without your phone. Don't reach for a task. Don't measure your worth by output. Just exist. If that terrifies you, if your mind screams that you're wasting time, that's not a personal flaw. That's the voice of discipline echoing inside you. That's the evidence that modern surveillance society has embedded itself into your nervous system. But you're not broken. You're just overtrained. The system has rewarded you so well for performing that you've forgotten how to simply be, and now that you've noticed it, the The silence becomes unbearable. But inside that silence, there's a doorway, a way out. And it begins with re-examining what you once accepted without question. Because behind every act of obedience, there's a deeper story, and we haven't even touched the most chilling part yet. What happens when you no longer need anyone to punish you, because you've already learned how to punish yourself? What happens when the control is so subtle, so normalized, that even your private thoughts bend toward what's expected? That's where we're going next, into the quiet horror of self-surveillance, where discipline becomes not just routine, but identity. Imagine living in a prison where there are no guards, no walls, and no one watching, but you still behave as if someone is. That's not paranoia. That's design. Jeremy Bentham's panopticon was never just architecture. It was a blueprint for perfect control. A tower in the center, cells arranged in a circle. One guard, unseen, possibly watching. The prisoners never know when, so they assume, always. And that assumption rewires everything. Foucault saw this and warned us. In the modern world, we've all become prisoners of perception. We act good not because someone's looking, but because we think they might be. And that's enough. The system doesn't need cameras anymore. It only needs your imagination. Because once you feel observed, you become your own observer. You don't need to be in a prison to live under surveillance. You just need Wi-Fi. That tiny rush when someone likes your post, that hesitation before saying something unpopular, that self-editing before you even speak, that's the panopticon in your pocket. It's not surveillance, it's self-surveillance. You clean up your personality, filter your emotions, and shrink your opinions before anyone has a chance to reject them. And you call it being smart, being polite, being professional. But what it really is fear. The fear of being misread, misunderstood, or excluded. Invisible control at its finest. Because when you censor yourself before anyone else does, the system has won without lifting a finger. Even your private thoughts aren't safe. Have you ever stopped yourself from thinking something because it felt wrong, or felt guilty for relaxing while others hustle? That's the internalized gaze. You've absorbed the eyes of bosses, teachers, parents, strangers, until they fused into one. A faceless, omnipresent authority living in your mind. You no longer need punishment. You provide it. You judge yourself. You scold yourself. You correct yourself. And you do it automatically. That's what makes the modern surveillance society so terrifying. It no longer needs enforcement, just habit. And those habits are so deeply ingrained, you confuse them with identity. Let's make it concrete. A young woman hesitates to wear bright clothes to work, not because of a dress code, but because she fears being seen as unprofessional. A man deletes a social media post because it's too emotional. A student rewords every sentence in their essay to match what they think the professor wants. These aren't small choices. These are micro-concessions, tiny betrayals of the self made every day to stay safe inside the system. The worst part? They often feel rational, logical, even empowering. That's the trick. The system convinces you that self-censorship is maturity, that playing small is wisdom, that adaptation is strength. But none of those things are freedom. And this extends far beyond individuals. Institutions have adopted the panopticon's logic at scale. Schools track participation. Workplaces monitor keystrokes. Hospitals log every movement. Even dating apps collect your preferences, package them, and sell your desires back to you. Surveillance is no longer punishment, it's performance. You're constantly being measured, compared, ranked. And so, you perform. Not just for others, but for algorithms, for systems, for metrics. And when you underperform, you blame yourself, not the cage. Because the cage is invisible, sanitized, efficient, necessary, or so you've been told. Now ask yourself, why do you always feel like you're not doing enough? Why does resting make you feel lazy? Why does unplugging feel irresponsible? That's not a productivity issue. That's internalized oppression. You've been trained to associate stillness with failure, and that training runs so deep, even your nervous system obeys. Your heartbeat accelerates during silence. Your muscles tense when you stop. Your mind races when you slow down. This isn't natural. This is learned, engineered. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to imagine another way of living. So here's your test. Try doing something that no one will ever see. Write a page and don't post it. Dance in your room with the curtains closed. Spend a day offline and tell no one. How does that feel? Liberating or terrifying? That's the edge of the panopticon. That's where your real self begins to emerge, and where the programmed self starts to panic. Because for so long, your value has been tied to visibility. But what if being unseen is the beginning of being free? What if invisibility is not a loss, but a return? And yet, seeing the panopticon doesn't destroy it. It just makes it visible. The real question is, how did we get here? How did obedience become the default setting of modern life? How did institutions, not armies, become the most powerful enforcers of control? To answer that, we have to go deeper, into the very heart of what society calls normal. Because sometimes, the most dangerous form of domination is the one disguised as common sense. Normal is one of the most dangerous words in the world. It sounds innocent, even comforting. But hidden inside that word is an entire system of judgment, exclusion, and control. Ask yourself, who decides what's normal? Is it the majority, the media, the market, the government? In reality, normal is not a reflection of what is, but a projection of what power wants to preserve. From the moment you were born, you were taught what to wear, how to speak, when to smile, who to love, what to fear. And the more you aligned with that template, the more approval you received. Not because it made you free, but because it made you predictable. Foucault saw this clearly. Normality is not neutrality. It is a weapon, one that rewards conformity and punishes difference with a velvet glove. Think of how early it starts. The quiet child is called polite. The loud one is corrected. The curious one is distracted. The emotional one is told to calm down. We don't raise humans. We sculpt citizens. And every deviation is treated not as a gift, but as a problem. The boy who prefers dolls. The girl who questions authority. The teen who doesn't chase grades. We pathologize them, diagnose them, redirect them back to the acceptable path. That's not support, that's domestication. And it works, because we don't want to be different. We want to be loved. We want to belong. And in a world where normal equals worthy, we'll trade authenticity for acceptance without blinking. But here's the twist. Normal changes depending on who's in power. What was once immoral becomes celebrated. What was once sacred becomes illegal. The standard is not fixed. It is manipulated, molded by politics, economics, media, and culture. Yet we treat it as truth. We fear being called abnormal more than we fear being unfulfilled. So we police our own behaviors, minimize our differences, and try to blend in. And when we fail, we don't blame the standard. We blame ourselves. That's the genius of invisible control. It doesn't just control your actions. It defines the criteria by which you judge yourself. And slowly, your reflection becomes unrecognizable. Not because you've changed, but because you've conformed. Ever met someone who has it all, but feels deeply out of place? The perfect job, the nice apartment, the gym membership, the weekends away, and yet they feel like a fraud. That's not imposter syndrome. That's identity erosion. They've followed the script so well that they've lost sight of who they were before the performance began. And when they finally pause, there's silence, emptiness. Because normal didn't liberate them. It erased them. And society applauds that. Because a person who questions nothing is much easier to manage than one who questions everything, especially when everything includes the rules, the rewards, and the very idea of success. Normality also creates hierarchies. It says, this is the right way to live, and everything else is failure. The neurodivergent student becomes difficult. The immigrant with an accent becomes less articulate. The poor worker with 3 jobs becomes lazy. The woman who speaks too firmly becomes aggressive. These aren't accidents. These are social codes designed to protect the dominant order. They pathologize resistance. They criminalize difference. They medicalize nonconformity. And in doing so, they strip people of their complexity. They reduce rich, messy lives into case files, productivity charts, and behavioral interventions, all in the name of improvement, all under the banner of normal. So people adapt. They soften their voices, lower their eyes, shrink their presence, not because they want to, but because survival often means disappearing just enough to be tolerated. And those who can't disappear? They are exiled, marginalized, forgotten. That's the hidden violence of normality. It doesn't scream. It excludes. Quietly. Efficiently. And when those excluded speak up, they're told they're overreacting. Too sensitive. Too radical. Too much. But what they really are is awake. Awake enough to see that the system isn't broken. It was built like this. Not to empower the many, but to preserve the comfort of the few. And comfort in this case is just another word for control. Here is what makes it even harder to escape. The system teaches you to love your chains. It wraps conformity in praise. It offers approval, validation, and even safety to those who comply. And because most people have been denied real love, real freedom, and real power, they settle for this counterfeit version. A good job, a nice personality, a stable future. But behind those smiles is a slow burning resentment, a quiet longing for something real. And when that longing grows loud enough, you begin to question, is this all there is? That's the first spark, the first crack in the mask. And once the mask slips, even for a second, the whole performance starts to unravel. Because once you realize that normality is a mask, the next question is, who put it on you? Who benefits from you staying small, compliant, and predictable? Who gains when you hide your creativity, suppress your anger, abandon your instincts? And more importantly, what happens when you stop? What happens when you remove the mask, even if your hands are shaking? That's where real change begins. But it doesn't come easy. Because after a lifetime of wearing normal like a second skin, taking it off feels like exposure, vulnerability, risk. But behind that risk is something worth fighting for. And in the next step of this journey, we'll talk about that fight. The struggle to wake up, to resist, and to live free. Waking up is not poetic. It's brutal. It starts with a whisper. Something doesn't feel right. The job you once fought to get now feels like a cage. The goals you chased so hard now seem hollow. The people around you praise your discipline, your stability, your success. But inside, something is breaking. Not loudly, quietly, like a floorboard creaking before it gives way. This is the first stage of awakening. Not a revolution, but a discomfort. You begin to see the cracks in the mask. You begin to feel the weight of choices you never truly made. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You're not ungrateful. You're just no longer willing to perform a life that doesn't feel like yours. Freedom sounds beautiful, but when you've been trained to obey, freedom feels like failure. You start saying no. You start questioning routines. You stop explaining yourself to people who never cared to understand. And suddenly, you're labeled rebellious, unstable, difficult. Not because you've changed, but because you've stopped pretending. That's the price of stepping off the track. You lose the applause of the obedient. You lose the comfort of predictability. But in return, you gain something far more valuable, your voice. And at first it's shaky. You doubt yourself. You miss the structure. But slowly, your own rhythm emerges, your own clarity. That's the beginning of breaking the system, not by burning it down, but by refusing to live on its terms. People think liberation looks like quitting your job, moving to the mountains, and meditating under the stars. Sometimes it does, but most of the time it looks smaller, subtler. It's the mother who stops apologizing for being tired, the cashier who draws at night instead of scrolling, the student who drops the major they never liked. These are not minor acts. They're acts of internal resistance. They don't make headlines, but they matter. Because the system doesn't fear fire. It fears lucidity, the kind of awareness that makes you impossible to manipulate. When you know who you are, what you value, and what you're no longer willing to trade, you become dangerous. Not to others. To the design that kept you asleep. Still, freedom is not constant. It's a choice you make every day, often in silence, often against pressure. You'll be tempted to go back, to make peace with comfort, to believe the lie that says, maybe it wasn't that bad. But that's just nostalgia for numbness, and numbness is not peace. It's just absence. Real peace begins when you stop needing to justify your existence, when you walk through the world knowing that your worth was never meant to be earned, that your rest is not laziness, that your sadness is not weakness, that your truth, even when inconvenient, is still valid. That's not romantic. That's raw. And it's exactly what freedom demands. And don't expect everyone to understand. Some will feel threatened. Some will mock you. Some will try to pull you back. Not because you're wrong, but because your courage reminds them of their own cage. You become a mirror they're not ready to face. But that's not your job. Your job is not to shrink for their comfort. It's to expand in spite of their fear. So find your people, the quiet rebels, the emotional thinkers, the dreamers disguised as misfits. They exist, and they're watching, waiting for someone like you to confirm what they've always suspected. There is another way to live, one that doesn't require you to betray yourself to be accepted. Here's a truth no one tells you. After awakening comes the void, the empty space where the old structure used to be. No more step-by-step rules. No more ready-made identity, and that silence can be terrifying. But inside that silence, something new can grow. Something that was never allowed before. Your actual self, your wildness, your contradictions, your voice before it was corrected, your desire before it was packaged. This is where you begin not just to escape the system, but to rebuild from within, on your terms, in your time. And it's messy, but it's real, and it's yours. That's what the system never wanted, for you to remember who you were before they told you who to be. It won't be easy. You'll fall back into old patterns. You'll forget your strength. You'll reach for validation, and when it doesn't come, you'll wonder if you're lost. That's normal. That's human. The point is not to be fearless. It's to move anyway, to speak anyway, to live anyway. Foucault didn't give us instructions. He gave us questions. And that's enough. Because the moment you start asking them, you begin the real work. The deep, unglamorous, liberating work of becoming. And when someone asks what changed, you'll have no dramatic answer. Just this: I woke up. And I couldn't go back. Not anymore. So here we are. On the edge of the system, eyes wide open. The walls haven't fallen, but they've cracked. The rules still exist, but they no longer feel absolute. And the voice inside you? It's louder now. Steadier. Not because the world got softer, but because you got stronger. But before we close this chapter, there's one more step to take. Because seeing the system and resisting it is only part of the journey. What comes next is even harder and more necessary. Learning how to live outside of it. You've seen it now. The routine isn't neutral. The rules weren't built for your freedom, and the obedience you were praised for, it was never a virtue. It was a survival mechanism dressed as success. So the question is, what will you do with this awareness? Will you go back to performing, fitting in, staying small, pretending not to feel the weight? Or will you start reclaiming what was always yours? You don't need permission to say no, to rest, to unlearn, to speak in your real voice, even if it shakes. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to be awake and willing to stay awake, even when it hurts. What part of yourself have you silenced to survive? And what would happen if just for once you let it speak? Let this video be the spark, not the solution, but the beginning of one. Share your voice in the comments. Tell me what part of this hit you hardest, because you're not alone in this. And if you're ready to keep digging, if you want to keep breaking the system from the inside, then hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. Because this isn't just a video, it's a revolution disguised as reflection.